I think it's square almost. Yes. Speed, the dreams, focus, speed. It's great. As far as we can tell, it's kind of as we can tell, it's yeah. Like I said, it's a little bit. It sounds to me like we're getting close. Obviously, I'm not on the ground for this. We're good rumors, but.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday Forum. We're very glad that you're here, whether you're here with us in person or online. I'm Jackie Prince, a member of the Sunday Forum Committee, and we're very pleased to have with us this morning Craig Freeman from Beacon. And he will give us a rundown of what's going on and how things are at Beacon these days. And then also let us know what's going on at the legislature. It's an exciting session. Craig has, we're getting an echo. Craig is Beacon's Community Connection Manager. He earned his BA and JD from the University of Iowa and was a litigator for a decade or so before joining Beacon. Each Wednesday, he does a Zoom tour for Beacon, and you can tune into that. And he also talks with congregations like ours and civic organizations and businesses to share Beacon's vision that all people have a home. And Craig, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And thank you all for being here, whether in person or online. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. I mean, Plymouth is the base. It's the root of Beacon. So being able to be here in person with you is wonderful. So with that, I am going to start sharing my screen on Zoom. All right. So as Jackie mentioned, my job is to really do things like this. I am privileged to be able to introduce the work we do at Beacon to folks, whether it's in person, online, in our buildings, for the first time or the 100th time. I often have folks who look a lot like a number of the faces in this room who have been around Beacon for a long time and come and just get a refresh on what it is that we do at Beacon. Regardless of how I'm presenting, though, and who I'm talking to, I always like to start by inviting folks to think to themselves, if you were to close your eyes and picture the word home, what is it that you see in your mind's eye? Now, for those of you here in the room, when you think of something, feel free to call out what it is that you picture.
The dinner table.
The dinner table. I often hear specific things within a home, and dinner table is a big one because dinner table is where we have family meals. You know, we all gather to celebrate holidays. We do those things that build memories for the rest of our lives. Some other things I'll hear within the home is bed is a big one. TV. I hear dog. What's that? Kitchen. Yes. What's it? Hearth. Yes. And hearth is a really important one because that's warmth. That's where we have that safety and that security that home symbolizes, where we can put our feet up, get a good night's sleep so we're ready for whatever the next day might bring. Anything else that comes to mind? Connection with neighbors. The people that you know are going to be there tomorrow and you can build that relationship with so that, you know, maybe they can help you plow out your driveway after we get 1.5 feet of snow or whatever the case may be. They do. This is Minnesota, right? Well, Beacon as an organization exists because far too many folks don't have that place. They don't have the place for their dining room table or their hearth to really build the roots with those neighbors. They're doing things like sleeping in cars. They're riding the bus or the train all night, couch hopping from one friend's couch to another. Or as we've just seen so up close and personal over the last 5 or 6 years, camping. In Minnesota, even on those days when we get 1.5 feet of snow. Well, at Beacon, we are now a collaborative of more than 100 congregations united in the vision that all people have a home. Not going to work. That's interesting. We're going to try a stop share here and start that over. Okay, here goes nothing. There we go. So there's that vision that all people have a home. We see a world where cars, buses, trains, those are just transportation. Couches are just a place to watch a movie. And tents exist only for when you want to get away from home for a weekend and go make yourself some s'mores. At base, we're working to help build a movement that says it is inexcusable in this society where we have so much that there are people who don't have home. Now, that's a difficult thing to do because, as I was driving up today, there was an individual signing out on LaSalle and Franklin. We see this all over the place. So it can get really hard to have a feeling that this is something that we can actually solve, that we can actually reach that vision. But at Beacon, we have so much hope that we can do that. Because as one of our leaders likes to say, why are people homeless? Because we allow it. We have absolutely everything that we need as a society, as a state, to end homelessness tomorrow. I mean, in a little while, I'm going to be talking about Bring It Home, about the legislation that is now introduced for the 4th year, that we truly believe would effectively end homelessness in the state of Minnesota. We can do this. Now, before I get to talking about that, though, I need to make sure that we're all on the same page. Do a little Beacon 101. Now, I know a lot of you have been around for a long time with Beacon, a lot longer than I have been. But, things change and we all need a little refresher. So up here on the screen now, I've got our 4 core values at Beacon. The 4 things that whenever we make a decision, we center these 4 items. And the one I like to talk about is that 3rd one on the list, race equity. Because it is impossible to do this work in this country, in this state, in the Twin Cities metro area without centering race equity. We've all heard the stats about the disproportionality of home ownership among our BIPOC neighbors, the disproportionality of those experiencing homelessness. But we don't even need to see the numbers. We can see it with our eyes. The folks who are standing on those street corners disproportionately are Black, Indigenous people of color. To really hammer that home, though, the numbers that just boggle my mind. If you look at the population of the state of Minnesota, adults, 7% are African American. But those experiencing homelessness, 37% are African American. On the Native American side, 1% of adults are Native American. 12% of those experiencing homelessness are Native. So you go from 8% of the population thereabouts, 49% of those experiencing homelessness, essentially half. That is why you cannot even start thinking about this work without centering race equity. So that's what we do. Now, a little bit of our history, and this is definitely going to be review for a lot of you. Because you see, we were founded by this congregation in Minneapolis that you might have heard of on the corner of LaSalle and Franklin. Back in, my understanding is about 1999 was when it was first floated. that there were a lot of folks experiencing homelessness in this neighborhood, and you all saw that. And you looked across the street, right across LaSalle here, and you saw that building that was empty. It was not being used. And you thought to yourselves, can we take this unused asset and turn it into something that meets this unmet need? Can we create homes for those who are experiencing homelessness in this neighborhood? And you talked about it and you decided, you know what? Not only can we do that, but your faith called you to do that. You needed to take that step. And then you went to the neighborhood and you said, here's the plan. Isn't it great? And the neighborhood said, we don't want those people here. We don't want the crime they're going to bring. There's already enough affordable housing around here. Somewhere else needs to step up. But you knew you were on the right track and you pushed forward. You put your faith on the line. Now, from what I understand, for a year, your Sunday morning services were picketed. One of the leaders in the congregation got married during that year and his wedding got picketed. I've seen the picture of the giant inflatable, I believe, gorilla on the flatbed truck across the street. The neighborhood suing when the city granted the land use changes, going all the way up to the Court of Appeals. But this congregation was steadfast. You stood strong. And in 2003, Lydia Apartments opened. 40 homes for single adults who have experienced homelessness and are dealing with a persistent mental or physical disability. 40 homes for those who desperately needed home. Now, I always tell that story when I'm giving these presentations. And part of the reason why I always tell it is because then I get to fast forward to about 2016 or so, when we decided we wanted to put that expansion on Lydia. And we went back to the neighborhood after 13 years, and we very sheepishly said, here's the plan, isn't it great? And the neighborhood's response to us was, actually, can you add more? Because had been there for 13 years at that point, and they'd been able to see that all those objections that they gave to you back in 1999, they weren't legitimate objections. Having Lydia here isn't a detriment to the neighborhood. It's a benefit. It makes this neighborhood a better place to be. So this summer, we were able to open that expansion. And now there are 80 homes there. Doubled the number of folks who are able to call Lydia home. Now, that's not to say we don't hear those same objections basically every time we announce a new building, because we do. Every single one of them we hear, we don't want those people here. We don't want the crime they're going to bring, all those things. But because we're now over 100 congregations in the collaborative, it's a different situation. It's not one congregation out there getting picketed every Sunday. It's more than 100, plus countless folks who don't belong to any congregation, standing shoulder to shoulder on behalf of affordable housing. You guys started that. You guys got us on this path. So before I go any further, I want to say thank you. Thank you to this congregation for being steadfast, for being so strong, and for leading us to this point. So we've grown now over the last, 24 years. We now have 19 buildings around the Twin Cities and 6 more that are in development. Some like Lydia for single adults, some for youth experiencing homelessness like Nicollet Square. We have family buildings. Our most recent building that opened, Cranberry Ridge out in Plymouth. We've got Great River Landing for single men, primarily African-American fathers who are exiting incarceration. We've got a senior housing building. We've got buildings that provide services on a housing first model. So, those services are for folks who have an ongoing chemical dependency issue, untreated mental health issue. We get them housed and then we start working on those things. And most of our buildings are supportive services. That's what really sets us apart from a lot of organizations. They're more than just a roof over the head. We partner with an expert in providing services to the population that's living in that building, and then they're right there on site to provide whatever services are needed. Be things like help with education, finding employment, navigating the healthcare system, dealing with trauma. I mean, if you're living in one of our buildings, you've experienced trauma. That needs to be dealt with on some level. Then it gets down to some of the things in our youth buildings, some smaller things we might hear, like, how do you cook spaghetti? How do you do your laundry so it doesn't come out all gray? Whatever residents need, staff are right there on site in order to provide. But what we've really learned over the last 24 years is while we need so many more Lydias, so many more Nicollet Squares, we cannot purely build our way out of the housing crisis. We must change the policies and systems that allow homelessness to occur in the first place. Right now in Minnesota, there are more than 550,000 people living in a household that are paying more than half their income every month for their housing. That is unsustainable. If you are paying that much, if your car breaks down, if you have an unexpected medical bill, that's when homelessness occurs. We need to do something to plug that gap and stop that from happening. So over the last 4 or 5 years, we have substantially increased the amount of work we're doing around policy, primarily through Bring It Home, which again, I will talk about more in depth here shortly. First, though, just a few more comments about those buildings so that everyone knows what they are. First off, the buildings that we build are for those making the absolute least or who are experiencing homelessness. You hear a lot of talk about affordable housing in the world at large. But what is affordable housing? That term can change depending on who's talking. Folks who are earning 50 to 60% of the area median income, that's affordable housing when it's built for them. But we build housing that's affordable for those earning 30% of the area median income. So that means in the Twin Cities area at large, so that's the full 7-county metro area, if you're an individual, you're earning $25,000 or less. If you're a family of 4, you're earning about $31,000 or less per year. But that's the Twin Cities metro as a whole. In Minneapolis, it's substantially less what 30% of the median income in Minneapolis is. And so when we're building homes, we're building folks who are earning oftentimes $10,000 a year, $15,000 a year, folks who quite simply have no other housing option. There's nothing else affordable in the Twin Cities metro for them. This is the most difficult area to build housing. And when I say area, I should clarify, I mean the income area, because it's folks with the greatest need. Nonetheless, we still are able to provide them with a safe, stable home, but more importantly, a home that they can be proud of, a home that is nice, that they can go home to and be happy to have their friends over and to really take pride in. We really work to ensure that these homes are homes that people want to live in. They're close to where everyone lives, works, and shops. I mean, they're right across the street here. BMO Seda, one of the buildings that we're building right now, downtown Minneapolis, right on 4th and Hennepin. And we're really working right now on expanding into the suburbs because we believe that affordable housing belongs in every community. So that's why we have homes now in Edina and Plymouth, and we're working on them in Richfield and Maplewood and Hopkins and Shakopee. Affordable housing belongs everywhere. How do we do this? How do we build these homes? Well, it's not an easy thing. I've been at Beacon now for about 4.5 years, and I'm still learning how exactly we go about doing this because it is incredibly complicated. But basically, we get out there first and we start telling these stories. We start telling stories of the folks who live in our building, which really starts to build hope amongst folks and passion to get this work done in their particular neighborhood. We start with the congregations in the collaborative, and then we spread out and we really get to the grassroots in a particular area. That starts to build public will, which starts to bring in private donations. Now, those private donations are important because they come to what we call seeds at Beacon. We know that it costs us about $21,000 for every home in a building before a shovel even hits dirt, before we even start digging. That's in our organizing costs to build that public will, to go to the local city council and get the land use changes. That's in our new housing development costs to find the right property, to get the architect on board and get a building designed. So when we're dealing with a 50-unit building at $21,000 per, that's a little over $1 million before we even start digging. So that's why we're getting those private contributions early. But then those private contributions become even more important because what we're able to do is we're able to turn around to governmental entities and ask for public money and say, look at the private money we already have. And we're able to then leverage that private money up to 20 times in public funds from the state, from the county, from the city. So what that means is if someone is able to donate $50, we can turn that into $1,000 in public money. If someone can dig super deep and donate $50,000, we can turn that into $1 million in public money. And we pool all this money together. A little time goes by, sometimes a little more time. And that's when buildings occur. That's when homes happen. So just real quick, we need to raise money every year. We need to raise about $4 million this fiscal year at Beacon by June 30th, because our fiscal year starts July 1. We're already at about $2.4 million this fiscal year, leaving about 1.6 to go. And that doesn't include a very large contribution that just was announced last week that we're super excited for, which should take us over $3 million. We will get there because folks care. Folks understand how important housing is, and they really will go that extra mile. But now, turning to that policy thing, because I know that that's really on the forefront of folks' minds right now as the legislative session continues. And as Representative Howard said at the rally we had on January 11th, the most impactful legislative session in Minnesota history continues. So this year, for the fourth consecutive year, Bring It Home Minnesota was introduced at the legislature by Rep. Howard in the House and Senator Mohammed this time in the Senate. It had been carried by Senator Dietzick, but she is now the majority leader, so she didn't want to carry the bill. Bring It Home Minnesota, at its base, would fully fund rental subsidy in this state. So a lot of folks have heard of Section 8 or housing vouchers or housing subsidies, but might not necessarily know what that means. What Section 8 is a federal program that says once you have a voucher, you pay 30% of your income, whatever that is, for your housing. And then the rest is subsidized by the government. The rest is paid. So you get a nice place to live. Landlords still get the fair rent. It works for everyone. But there's only enough money in the program for about 1 in 4 who qualify. So 3/4 of folks aren't able to get a voucher, even though financially they should. So what that means in practice, we saw, it's about 5 years ago now or so, when the Met Council, Minneapolis and St. Paul opened up the ability to apply to get on the wait list for a Section 8 voucher. And they received over 45,000 applications. Now, they had enough space on that wait list for about 7,500, meaning more than 35,000 applications didn't even get waitlisted. And those that did, they're probably still waiting this 5 years later, because that's how long it takes. Well, when Bring It Home passes, that won't be an issue anymore. Every Minnesotan who qualifies financially will get a rental subsidy, will get a voucher, will be able to afford their home. Now, that's a big ask. It's a big number. We're talking Bring It Home is going to cost about $2 billion per year. But to put that in perspective, currently the state of Minnesota spends 0.5% of its annual budget on housing. 0.5%. That $2 billion would bring us to about 3% of the state's annual budget. That's nothing, 3%. And it would virtually end homelessness in this state. Now, we were not expecting this 6 months ago, but there's a real chance that Bring It Home could pass this year. We have been accelerating everything. It's an incredibly exciting time to be involved in this. Now, will Bring It Home pass with the full $2 billion? I'm not going to hold my breath on that. But will it pass with a significant investment? We can get that done. And that is the main thing that we are asking folks today, not just here, but everywhere, to really, really help push. Over on that table, there's some postcards to Speaker Hortman, and Senator Dietzick to say, hey, make sure Bring It Home is in the budget in the House and in the Senate. Make sure this passes. There's also a flyer over there about an event that I'll talk about a little bit more on the 20th, where we're having a lobby day followed by another enormous rally in the Capitol Rotunda. And I tell you what, if you weren't at the January 11th rally in the Rotunda, you need to go on March 20th because it was phenomenal. It was so inspiring and so exciting, and just the feel of the place that we can do this. There are more than 40 organizations in the Bring It Home Coalition now, and more are coming on all the time. We truly are helping build a movement to end homelessness in the state. Now, why are we doing that? Why is this good for everyone? So there's a lot of writing on this slide. I don't usually like to put this much writing on there, but it's important. This protects families. This ensures families are going to have a safe place to live and a way that they can choose where they're going to live. They can live in the suburb that's close to their job. They can live in Minneapolis if that's close to where the kids go to school. They can really choose and figure out where it is that they want to be. It's going to improve mental and physical health for everyone in the household. It's going to improve how kids perform in school. Can you imagine being a school-age child and sleeping in a car with your family and then trying to go to school the next day and perform at any sort of level? It doesn't work. Stable home, which Bring It Home would provide, is going to improve how kids do in school. It's going to massively improve the racial inequity that we have in the Twin Cities. Because our BIPOC neighbors, who we talked about how disproportionately they are represented in those experiencing homelessness, will now have home. Now they'll be in a place where they can actually hopefully save some money that they get. And maybe down the road, they'll be able to buy their own home and start working on improving that disproportionality among home ownership. It's a step. It's not going to solve all the problems in the racial inequities we have, but it is a step. Now, it's going to help us also have more homes. Developers are going to be able to have financing. We're going to be able to build more homes. Every time we announce a new building, like when we did the Lydia expansion, we had to go to the city of Minneapolis and figure out how we were going to get 40 site-based vouchers for those 40 new homes. With Prairie Point in Shakopee, we've had to go to the Met Council and say, we need site-based vouchers so that folks can afford to live in this home, and then we can afford to run the building. One time they said no. It took us an extra year to get to where we are in Prairie Point because they said no. If Bring It Home passes and there are vouchers for everyone, that's no longer an issue. We can build more homes. Common Bond, Aon, Project for Pride in Living, all of these developers, we can build more homes for those who need them. Every single positive effect that housing provides around human services will be improved. We'll spend less money elsewhere. We'll spend less money on healthcare, on education, on criminal justice, all because folks have home. Bring It Home is game changing in the state of Minnesota. We need to get it passed. I forgot to pull my phone out to make sure I'm talking in a good time. All right, we're good. We're good. So what are we doing? What are our next steps? I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give people some next steps. So here they are. First up, March 1st. So next week is our next rent is due. 8:30 in the morning on the first business day of every month, our policy folks have a Zoom call where they update where things are at the legislature and other policy things, and really provide an opportunity for folks to take one small action. Things like calling your particular legislator, sending an email to the governor and lieutenant governor, really small, easy things that anyone can do that really make a big difference. So I highly recommend going to that rent is due. And then the next thing, that March 20th, the Beacon Lobby Day and Bring It Home, Minnesota. I can't recommend enough to go to that. Now, some people get scared by the word lobby. I'm not a lobbyist. I don't lobby things. This isn't what you see on TV or in Washington, D.C. as far as lobbying goes. This is going in a group and meeting with your particular representative, your particular senator. And for most of you, I'm guessing, simply saying thanks. Thank you for supporting Bring It Home, Minnesota. Keep pushing, keep doing the work. Some of you, it might be, I want you to support Bring It Home. But you're in a group. It's a really easy thing to do. It's a very impactful thing to do. And then there's that rally. And we've got things set up where we're bringing in buses from the east and the west. If people don't want to bother with parking at the Capitol, we're really trying to make it as easy as possible. So I highly recommend signing up for that. Then the last thing is introducing more people to Beacon. This is a statewide problem that needs a statewide response, so we need everyone on board. The easiest way to introduce people to the work we do is to invite them to come to one of my Wednesday at 2 o'clock virtual tours. It's very similar to this, a little shorter, but very similar to this. And I talk about a different topic each month. So actually in March, I'm going to be talking about some of the staffing things that have happened at Beacon, because there's a lot going on. Lee Blondes, our CEO and president, after 20 years is retiring. There's a still new union of staff members at Beacon. There is a lot going on. So I'm going to be providing some updates on some of those things throughout the month of March. So invite people to come to that and they can learn a little bit more. Or I love doing these things, whether it's at a congregation, a civic organization, in your home to those neighbors who help you shovel. I love to do these and will happily come out and talk about whatever topic folks are interested in. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for coming. And I would love to answer any questions about what I've talked about, what I haven't talked about, Beacon as a whole. Please feel free to ask. And I'm going to stop sharing so that people can see me better online.
Does anyone have a question?
It's easy to imagine how less money would be spent on healthcare and criminal justice and so on when people have housing. A lot of those problems are circumvented by people having housing. I was just curious, are there studies to really show what the cost benefit ratio is? Looking at how much those kinds of costs are diminished when people are housed?
Unfortunately, we don't have a good study at this point because no one has done something like this. So we're really kind of blazing a trail here. But there is some data that I know our policy folks have that unfortunately I don't know off the top of my head that is helpful. But I can certainly ask them and can get back to you later on that.
Craig, thanks for the presentation. If this goes through, which we'll hope, and there are all these vouchers then that people can get, question is, how much existing housing stock is there out there available now if they have opportunity? And then how much new that has to be built? I mean, What are the numbers? What's available now for them to move into right away if they were lucky enough?
Well, as far as moving into now, one of the other issues that we're going to have to deal with is landlords who don't want to take someone with a rental subsidy. We have got landlord organizations on board, and they are talking to their members to explain to them that this is a great thing for us. It ensures that we're able to get paid for leasing out our properties. But there is still going to be some issue working through that. So that is going to take a little bit of time. And additionally, we do absolutely still need so much more stock. It's going to take, I would guess, a few years before we see the full benefit as we work through those things. But we're still a little bit in the dark on that as well.
But again, is there a lot of stock out there now that would be available if
I don't know if I'd say a lot of stock. There is stock, and there's more all the time. So we're working, we're getting there, but we need more. Yeah.
So it's basically open to any landlord, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So as long as the landlord's willing to take the vouchers,
Yep.
I mean, any landlord can do this. The issue is convincing landlords to do it.
Landlords all have this image of who has a subsidy, that they're going to bring crime and they're those people and all those things. And so it's going to take some convincing.
What's happening to preserve the naturally occurring affordable housing? Because from where I sit, I see that disappearing faster than we can build. I mean, you can't really build affordable housing. It costs the same whether it's affordable or market rate. What are we doing to preserve the naturally occurring affordable?
Yeah, it actually oftentimes costs more to build affordable housing than regular housing. So at Beacon, we aren't personally involved in preservation of NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing. But some of the other organizations, especially AON and Common Bond, they're doing a lot of work on that, in working to buy those buildings that are already affordable before they hit the open market and someone is able to rehab and or whatever needs to be done to bring them up to market rate. But yeah, they're having trouble keeping up because, like you say, it's going so fast. We lose more than we absolutely should. But they're doing what they can.
What was the Met Council's reasoning for denying that permit?
So the denial of the site-based Section 8 vouchers for Prairie Point, their reasoning was essentially based on scarcity, that we only have, I think it was 200 site-based vouchers that we can give out. And Prairie Point is a few years away, so we don't want to give them out. But the issue with that argument is they didn't give them to anybody else either. They just held them. So they weren't helping anyone. And so we did a pretty massive lobbying effort with Met Council, which interestingly, Met Council not used to getting lobbied. They were surprised by that. To convince them that there's not scarcity here. We need these in the public in some way helping, because we didn't have those vouchers, then that year we did not get funded for the capital from the state. We needed to have those in place. The next year when they gave them to us again, we got the funding. So now we're just working on closing a small capital gap, and Prairie Point should break ground here in 2023. So yeah, we at Beacon, we take an abundance mindset to everything we do, including our fundraising and everything else. Scarcity, we don't believe in. There is enough. We just need to find it.
Right.
I am.
Hey, I'm Nathan. My wife is your colleague Kate,
Oh,
and she asked that I asked you to just bring the postcards back to the office. Just signing some, but I'm gonna get these two out of here. Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you too.
I just have a question about whether and to what extent you might be partnering with other organizations, for example, looking at the public benefits question, because if I'm, for example, if I'm a single parent with one child in Minnesota and I'm getting public benefits, I'm getting $437 a month, which has remained static since the 1980s. And so if I'm paying 30% of that for my income, if I'm lucky enough to get a voucher and I'm paying 30% of that, that means I've got about $300 for everything else. And so eventually I may have a crisis where I don't pay that 30%. I'm going to say to myself, I got to fix my car, and then I'm going to lose my voucher because I'm getting behind in my rent. And so I really become increasingly concerned about that divide. We talk a lot about people who are low income wage earners, but people who are on public benefits are really suffering and really struggling, and they're much more insecure in their housing. And the likelihood of people being able to retain it is really small.
So the first thing we do on that is hopefully our on-site service provider is on top of that and is helping the resident find access to everything that they need. I just gave a tour last week. Okay. Well, maybe not all, some of them are, because I just gave a tour last week at Nicollet Square to some folks who are on a committee at St. Joan of Arc who gives some of that emergency rental help to folks. And they get an application from folks at Nicollet Square absolutely every month, at least one, it sounds like. So some of them are on that. A second thing I will say is it is incredibly unlikely that Beacon is ever going to evict someone for failure to pay rent. Now, don't tell people that because we want them paying their rent. But it would take something just enormously wrong for that to happen. We're not going to do that. Beyond that, so I don't know if you know a specific issue that somewhere somebody wasn't getting plugged into some of those other services to help out with plugging some of those gaps, but in our buildings, they should be.
That's one assignment I had, is I coordinated a program where we were offering off-site shelter for people fleeing violence during the pandemic. And we had a number of people who got into different different kinds of subsidized programs, and I doubt that any of them were Beacon, but some of those people have already lost their housing. And so it is a really important thing that there be enough housing that people can get into, but it's a whole other thing to provide the sufficient support for people to retain it.
Right.
And one of the things that I've become increasingly concerned about is the static nature of public benefits. And a lot of people have no choice but to live on public benefits. And so it's just a little plug, I guess, for people being really conscious of that and trying to do what we can to get those benefit levels raised.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely an issue, especially as you mentioned, the single parents of small kids, and the numbers are disturbing. That it's been basically 40 years since that's gone up. It's absurd. All I can say is at Beacon, we're not going to let that happen. I can't speak for others.
I wanted to express gratitude to Beacon. I do remember the blow up gorilla. My daughter was in Sunday school at the time and was really into dinosaurs, and she thought that was pretty cool. So it was pretty cool at the time to go to church with the gorilla outside. And working in housing, you know, one of the things I remember from my career that would be difficult is when there's a general rental housing shortage in the metro area. Having landlords want to take vouchers when they could rent it much higher
Right.
rents. But it was one challenge. The other thing that we noticed was government will define homelessness as narrow as possible. So we can say we have the fewest homeless people. So it meant proving that you stayed last night at a place that was not considered a living place, like in a garage. And then they would ask, well, was the garage heated? And then it was in a car, or those kinds of things. And also the challenge would be if I got into a single room occupancy and now I have my cousin over here who has no place to live. Well, come stay here tonight. You have people that have substance use concerns that may be bringing in people dealing. I mean, it sounds, I mean, it's so impressive, but there's a lot of day-to-day things that I know you guys have to be dealing with. And I want to thank you for that because it isn't easy.
Yeah, it's not easy. But we do what we can on that stuff. Especially in our youth buildings, we have very specific rules about overnight guests, essentially to alleviate that issue of my friends who I spent so much time on the street with, they don't have a place. And especially in those youth buildings, we see an average stay of around 18 months or so. And we know that if they move out and move into a market rate apartment with a couple roommates or whatever, and they start moving their friends in to get them off the street, they're going to get evicted. And now it's going to be that much more difficult for them to get the next place, basically impossible. So that's why we have those rules about overnight guests, to get them to understand that we know you probably feel guilty that you got a space and your friends didn't, but this is something you can't do for your own safety and your own future. You have to do this. The ongoing chemical dependency issue, security is an issue, and we work on that. We especially have recently had an issue with that at our Kimball Court building on Snelling and St. Paul. We went through about 5, I believe it was, security companies in 10 months because they weren't doing the job. They weren't keeping the residents safe. They weren't keeping things from being broken. But we think we finally now have the right company there. They've been there since September, and calls to the police are way down. Issues with the neighborhood are way down. So it's an ongoing difficult thing. But we owe it not just to, our supporters, but mostly to the residents to make sure that we keep up with that. And one thing I always say to folks when those issues come up is hold our feet to the fire. If we're not holding up our end of the bargain on that, let us know, because we owe it to those residents.
Thank you. I hate to bring this to a close, but thank you so much, Craig. This has been a very enlightening morning, and hopefully an inspiring one as well. Please come back and join us next week when our own Elizabeth Blanchette will sort of give us the backstage story of how she manages to keep us all informed, and our neighborhood and community as well. And she does magical things with our website and other publications, and will be an interesting forum. And as you leave, please fill out these cards if you have one at your seat.
Even just your name is fine, because I assume I have most of your contact info already.
And please take the time to sign a postcard. All you need is your signature. And if you are available on March 20th, please join us at the Capitol. It'll be a very inspiring day. Thank you again, Craig.
Thank you.
Thank you.